Rain pelted the streets of downtown Los Angeles on a particularly gloomy Tuesday evening, transforming the normally sun-drenched city into a shimmering landscape of reflections and hurried pedestrians. Among them, a solitary figure moved unhurriedly through the downpour, seemingly unbothered by the weather. Dressed in a simple black jacket, worn jeans, and motorcycle boots, his long dark hair now slick against his face, the man approached one of the city's most talked-about new restaurants. Wix. Opened just 3 months ago, Wix had quickly become the most sought-after reservation in the city. Its innovative fusion cuisine, intimate atmosphere, and strict no-photography policy had made it a favorite among celebrities seeking a rare moment of dining privacy. The fact that it was rumored to be partially owned by Keanu Reeves, though he had never publicly confirmed this, only added to its mystique and exclusivity. Tonight, the restaurant glowed like a beacon against the dreary weather, its warm lighting and stylish facade drawing in those fortunate enough to have secured a coveted table. A small queue of well-dressed patrons huddled beneath the awning, protected from the rain as they waited for the doors to open for the evening service. Among them stood Ethan Morgan, the restaurant's new maître d', hired just 2 weeks ago from one of New York's most prestigious establishments. At 29, Ethan was ambitious, image-conscious, and determined to make his mark in the competitive world of high-end dining. Tonight marked his first shift managing the front of house alone, an opportunity he intended to leverage into invaluable connections with the city's elite. In his expertly tailored suit and with his immaculately styled hair, he looked every bit the gatekeeper to Los Angeles' most exclusive dining experience. As the clock struck 6, Ethan opened the heavy wooden doors with practiced ceremony, welcoming the first guests of the evening with a perfect blend of deference and authority. "Good evening, welcome to Wix," he greeted each party, smoothly checking their names against the reservation list on his tablet before directing them to their tables. The rain-soaked man arrived just as the initial rush was subsiding, water dripping from his jacket onto the polished concrete floor. He approached the podium with an easy, unassuming manner, his expression calm and slightly apologetic for his drenched appearance. "Good evening," he said, his voice gentle but carrying a distinctive resonance. "Table for one, please." Ethan's practiced smile remained fixed, but his eyes performed a quick assessment that found the man wanting. In the past 2 weeks, he had begun to recognize the restaurant's typical clientele: studio executives in casual but expensive attire, actors dressed down in clothing that nevertheless cost more than a month's rent, producers and agents with their understated designer watches and subtle signals of wealth and influence. This man, with his sodden appearance and lack of reservation, didn't fit the profile. The fact that he somewhat resembled Keanu Reeves, albeit a particularly wet version, registered only as an ironic footnote in Ethan's quick judgment. "I'm sorry, sir," Ethan replied with practiced regret. "We're fully booked this evening. Wix operates strictly by reservation only, and we're typically reserved weeks in advance." The man nodded thoughtfully, seemingly unsurprised by this information. "I understand. It's last minute, and I don't have a reservation. Is there perhaps a spot at the bar?" Ethan glanced at the sleek bar area, where several spaces were indeed open. The bartender, Sophia, caught his eye with a subtle nod indicating she could accommodate another guest. But Ethan had been explicitly instructed about maintaining the restaurant's exclusive atmosphere, and the rain-drenched man before him simply didn't project the image Wix cultivated. "I'm afraid our bar seating is also reserved this evening," Ethan lied smoothly. "Perhaps another night? I'd be happy to help you make a reservation for a future date." Something flickered across the man's face, not anger or frustration, but a quiet recognition, as if he had encountered such treatment before and had long since made peace with it. "No problem," he said with a gentle smile. "I should have called ahead, another time perhaps." As he turned to leave, a voice called out from within the restaurant. "Keanu, is that you?" The man paused and turned as a tall, elegant woman in chef's whites emerged from the kitchen area, her face lighting up with recognition. Elena Vasquez, Wix head chef and co-owner, hurried across the restaurant, weaving between tables with practiced ease. "I thought that was you! You're soaked to the bone." she exclaimed, embracing the wet man without hesitation. Turning to Ethan, whose face had frozen in an expression of dawning horror, she asked, "Why is he standing in the doorway? Didn't you seat him?" I'm sorry, Chef Vasquez," Ethan stammered, his confident demeanor crumbling. "There was no reservation, and I didn't realize." "Reservation?" Elena laughed. "Keanu doesn't need a reservation at his own restaurant." She turned back to Keanu Reeves, for it was indeed him, despite his rain-drenched appearance. "The motorcycle in this weather, again?" Keanu shrugged with a self-deprecating smile. "You know me, rain or shine." "Well, come in before you catch pneumonia," Elena insisted, leading him past the now mortified maitre d'. "Sophie will get you a towel, and I have a new dish I want you to try." As they passed, Keanu paused briefly beside the frozen Ethan. "No harm done," he said quietly. "You were just doing your job as you understood it." Those simple words, free from condescension or anger, somehow made Ethan feel worse than any reprimand could have. As he watched Keanu follow Elena toward the bar, whispers began to spread among the seated diners. The signature low-key presence of the restaurant's famous co-owner, now recognized despite his humble appearance. Ethan remained at his post, his face burning with embarrassment, as the implications of his misjudgment sank in. He had just turned away Keanu Reeves, not only a world-famous actor but his actual employer, from his own restaurant, based on nothing more than surface appearance and snap judgment. What happened next would become restaurant legend. "Morgan, my office. Now." The terse instruction came from Marcus Wright, Wick's general manager and Ethan's direct supervisor, as the dinner service reached its midpoint. Ethan followed Marcus to the small office tucked behind the kitchen, preparing himself for the inevitable termination. 2 weeks into what should have been his dream job, and he had committed the cardinal sin of high-end hospitality, judging worth by appearance. Marcus closed the door and gestured for Ethan to sit. Rather than taking the seat behind the desk, he perched on its edge, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "So," he began, "you turned away Keanu Reeves." Ethan swallowed hard. "I did. I had no idea it was him, and he didn't say who he was. I just judged him by his appearance," Marcus finished for him. "Wet clothes, no reservation, so you made an executive decision." "Yes," Ethan admitted, deciding that honesty was his only option. "It was a terrible misjudgment, and I understand if I need to clear out my locker tonight." To his surprise, Marcus let out a short laugh. "Keen to be the martyr, aren't you? Mr. Reeves specifically asked that you not be disciplined." Ethan blinked in confusion. "He? What?" "Right after Elena seated him and gave me a blistering update on what happened, he came back here himself, said you were doing exactly what you thought the job required, said it was a failure of information, not character." "That's unusually generous," Ethan managed, struggling to process this unexpected development. "That's Keanu," Marcus replied with a shrug. "In the 3 years I've worked with him on this place, I've never once seen him pull the Sears "do you know who I am" card, even when he probably should have." Ethan sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile this information with his understanding of how the world worked, particularly the world of celebrity, wealth, and power that he had been so eager to access. "So, I'm not fired?" he finally asked. "That depends," Marcus answered, his expression turning serious, "on whether you learn the right lesson from this." "Which is?" "That's what I want you to tell me. Take a minute. Think about what happened tonight, what it means, and what you should take away from it." Ethan considered the question carefully, aware that his job likely hung in the balance. His initial instinct was to formulate the answer he thought Marcus wanted to hear, something about not judging books by their covers or treating all guests with equal respect. But as he reflected on the interaction with Keanu Reeves, the gentle acceptance of rejection, the lack of entitlement despite literally owning the establishment, the request that Ethan not be punished, he realized there was a deeper lesson at play. "I think," Ethan began slowly, "I've been approaching this job with the wrong priorities. I've been focused on the prestige, on being the gatekeeper to exclusivity. I saw my role as keeping people out rather than welcoming people in." Marcus nodded slightly but remained silent, allowing Ethan to continue. "Mr. Reeves created this restaurant but didn't feel the need to announce himself or demand special treatment. He was willing to be turned away from his own establishment rather than pull rank or embarrass me." Ethan paused, then added, "That suggests a fundamentally different understanding of ownership and status than what I've been operating under." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Go on." "I think the lesson is that true ownership isn't about control or exclusivity or status. It's about creation and sharing and, I don't know, a kind of humility." Ethan struggled to articulate the realization forming in his mind. Mr. Reeves could have walked in and announced himself, made sure everyone knew who he was, but he approached like any other guest, willing to be judged on the same terms as anyone else. A small smile formed on Marcus's face. "Now you're getting it. One more question. If Keanu Reeves came back tomorrow, soaking wet from another rainstorm, no reservation, would you seat him?" "Of course," Ethan replied immediately. "And what if it wasn't Keanu, but someone who looked exactly like him did tonight? Same wet clothes, same humble demeanor, same lack of reservation?" Ethan paused, recognizing the trap. "I would want to turn them away, based on our policy. But I think the real lesson is that I shouldn't." "Why not?" Marcus pressed. "Because I can't know their story. Because appearance isn't the same as worth. Because exclusivity based solely on external markers misses the point of what makes a place special." Ethan hesitated, then added, "And because if I'd been operating on those principles tonight, I wouldn't have made such a colossal error in judgment." Marcus nodded, seemingly satisfied with the response. "Good. Then I think we can move forward. But I do have one condition." "Name it," Ethan said, relief washing over him. "Mr. Reeves would like you to join him for a few minutes. He's still here, at the chef's table in the kitchen. He specifically requested to speak with you once we'd had our chat." Ethan's relief immediately transformed back into anxiety. "He wants to talk to me? Why?" Marcus shrugged. "He didn't say, but I'd suggest not keeping him waiting. And Ethan," he added as the young maitre d' stood to leave, "remember what you just said about worth and appearance. It applies to you too. The fancy suit and perfect hair don't make you better than anyone else walking through that door." With those words echoing in his mind, Ethan made his way through the busy restaurant toward the kitchen, hyper-aware of how his earlier arrogance now seemed not just misplaced, but almost comically naive. The chef's table at Wick's was a special four-seat counter positioned to view the choreographed precision of the kitchen without disrupting its flow. Tonight, Keanu Reeves occupied it alone, now dry and changed into a simple black t-shirt that Elena had apparently found for him. He was reading a book while thoughtfully tasting a small plate of what appeared to be the kitchen's newest creation. He looked up as Ethan approached, marking his place in the book and setting it aside. Up close, without the barrier of rain and the maitre d' podium between them, his presence was both more ordinary and more compelling than Ethan had expected, a contradiction that somehow made perfect sense. "Mr. Morgan," Keanu greeted him, gesturing to the stool beside him. "Please join me." "Mr. Reeves," Ethan replied, taking the offered seat stiffly. "I want to apologize for—" Keanu raised a hand, gently interrupting. "No need, really, but I did want to talk with you if that's okay." Ethan nodded, unsure what to expect. "Try this," Keanu said, pushing a small plate toward him. "Elena's experimenting with a new scallop dish. I'd value a second opinion." Bewildered by this unexpected direction, Ethan carefully tasted the offering. The scallop was perfectly seared, complemented by a complex sauce that balanced acidity, sweetness, and umami in a way that momentarily distracted him from his discomfort. "It's extraordinary," he said honestly. "The pickled ginger provides a perfect counterpoint to the richness of the scallop." Keanu nodded, seeming pleased by the assessment. "I thought so too. Elena has an exceptional talent for balance, finding harmony between opposing elements." He paused, studying Ethan thoughtfully. "Marcus tells me you came from 11 Madison Park in New York." "Yes, sir. I was there for 3 years before moving to Los Angeles." "Impressive credentials, one of the best restaurants in the world." Keanu took a sip of water. "Tell me, why did you want to work at Wick's?" The question seemed straightforward, but Ethan sensed a deeper purpose behind it. After his revelation in Marcus's office, he decided that continued honesty was his only viable path. Initially, because of its exclusivity and growing reputation, he admitted, and honestly, because of the rumors about your involvement. I thought it would be a place to make connections, To become part of the inner circle of Los Angeles dining. Keanu nodded, unsurprised by the answer. And now, Ethan considered the question. Now I'm not sure. I think I may have misunderstood what makes this place special. How so? Well, for one thing, its famous owner apparently doesn't mind being turned away from his own establishment, Ethan said with a self-deprecating smile. Keanu laughed softly. That's part of it. When Elena and I were developing the concept for Wix, we talked a lot about what ownership really means. She's the culinary genius. I'm just the silent partner who provided some capital and occasional design input. But we both agreed on one core principle. Ownership isn't about privilege, it's about responsibility. He gestured around the busy kitchen, where staff moved with focused precision, each contributing to the seamless experience of the diners beyond. I own shares in this restaurant on paper, but in reality it belongs to many people. Elena, who pours her creativity and heritage into every dish. Marcus, who manages the complex ecosystem of service, the staff who show up every day to create memorable experiences, even the guests who choose to spend their time and money here. True ownership is distributed, not concentrated. Ethan considered this perspective, so different from the hierarchical, status-conscious world he had been navigating. That's why you didn't announce yourself or demand entry. Partly, Keanu acknowledged. But it's also simpler than that. I don't believe anyone should receive special treatment based solely on wealth or fame or position. If our policy is reservations required, then it should apply to everyone, including me. But you do own the place, Ethan pointed out. Technically, you could make whatever rules you want. I could, Keanu agreed. And in an emergency or truly important situation, maybe I would. But constant exceptions for the powerful undermine the entire concept of fairness. If the rules only apply to some people, they're not really rules. They're just tools of inequality. The simplicity and clarity of this philosophy struck Ethan deeply. Throughout his career in high-end hospitality, he had been trained to recognize and accommodate power, to bend rules for the important, the wealthy, the famous, while maintaining the illusion of standards for everyone else. Can I ask you something else? Ethan ventured. Keanu nodded. Why did you ask Marcus not to fire me? Most people in your position would have been less understanding. Keanu considered the question before answering. Because firing you doesn't solve the real problem. You were acting based on the values you thought we wanted you to uphold. Exclusivity, image, status. That's not your failure. It's a failure of communication about what Wix truly stands for. He picked up his book, a well-worn volume of poetry, and continued. Besides, we all make judgments based on incomplete information. The question isn't whether we make these mistakes, we all do, but how we respond when we realize we've made them. Your reaction when you realized who I was told me everything I needed to know. My reaction? Ethan echoed, remembering his mortification. I was horrified. Exactly, Keanu said with a small smile. Not because you'd potentially angered someone powerful, but because you recognized the inherent wrongness of the judgment itself. That's a good foundation to build on. Elena approached the chef's table, wiping her hands on a towel. So, verdict on the scallops? Transcendent, Keanu replied. Ethan agrees, though I wonder if a touch more acid might cut through the richness even further. Elena considered this. Interesting thought. I'll try a version with increased yuzu in the next iteration. She turned to Ethan. And how are you holding up? Has he given you the ownership speech yet? Ethan nodded, somewhat dazed by the casual way she addressed the situation. He has. It's not what I expected. Never is, Elena said with a knowing smile. First time I met him, I thought he was a motorcycle messenger delivering investment papers for the real Keanu Reeves. Made him wait in the back alley of my old restaurant for 20 minutes while I finished plating a dinner service. She still hasn't let me forget it, Keanu added with good-natured acceptance. The difference, Elena pointed out, is that I apologized profusely once I realized my mistake. You, on the other hand, specifically requested that we not update the staff about your ownership stake because... What was it you said? I'd rather be treated like any other guest, Keanu quoted himself, though I'm beginning to see some flaws in that approach. The three shared a laugh, the tension that had been gripping Ethan since his office meeting with Marcus finally beginning to ease. As Elena returned to overseeing the kitchen, Keanu turned back to Ethan with a more serious expression. Marcus tells me you have an excellent eye for detail and genuine talent for orchestrating a dining room. Those are valuable skills. But the most valuable skill in this business, or any business really, is the ability to see people as they are, not as their external trappings suggest. He stood, indicating their conversation was drawing to a close. I hope you'll stay at Wix, Mr. Morgan, not despite tonight's misunderstanding, but because of what you might learn from it. The restaurant needs people who can grow and adapt their perspective. Ethan stood as well, feeling as though he had been given not just a second chance at employment, but a new framework for understanding his role. Thank you, Mr. Reeves. I appreciate the opportunity to learn from this. Keanu offered his hand. Please, call me Keanu, and next time I show up dripping wet with no reservation, maybe we can skip directly to the part where Elena yells at me about motorcycle safety. In the weeks that followed, Wix continued its meteoric rise in Los Angeles' competitive dining scene. Reservations remained difficult to secure, but subtle changes began to appear in how the restaurant operated. Changes that reflected the conversation in the kitchen that rainy Tuesday night. Ethan, still serving as maître d', found himself approaching his role with a fundamentally different perspective. Where once he had seen himself as the keeper of an exclusive gate, he now viewed his position as that of a facilitator, someone whose job was to create welcoming experiences rather than to judge worthiness of entry. With Marcus's approval, he implemented a new policy: 2 tables and 4 bar seats held back each night for walk-ins, determined by lottery rather than appearance or perceived status. The practice initially raised eyebrows among some regular patrons accustomed to the restaurant's exclusivity, but it soon became one of Wix's most talked-about features, a small act of democratic access in a city often defined by its hierarchies of influence. On a particularly busy Friday evening, about a month after the infamous turning away incident, Ethan was managing the front of house with his new approach when an elderly couple arrived without a reservation. "We know it's unlikely," the woman explained apologetically, "but it's our 50th anniversary, and we've been trying for weeks to get a reservation. We thought we'd just try our luck." In his former mindset, Ethan would have assessed their modest clothing and unassuming demeanor and found a polite way to turn them away. Instead, he smiled genuinely and explained the lottery system for the walk-in tables, adding their names to the list. "Congratulations on 50 years, he said, offering them seats in the small waiting area. "While you wait for the lottery drawing, may I offer you a complimentary glass of champagne to celebrate your anniversary?" The couple's faces lit up with surprise and gratitude. As Ethan arranged for their champagne, he noticed a familiar figure sitting alone at the far end of the bar. Keanu, dressed simply in black again, observing the interaction with quiet approval. Later that evening, when the lottery was drawn and the couple's name was selected, perhaps with a bit of anniversary luck, perhaps not, their joy was palpable. As Ethan led them to their table, he caught Keanu's eye again, receiving a subtle nod of recognition that communicated more than words could have. After the dinner service wound down, Keanu approached the podium where Ethan was updating the reservation system for the following day. "The anniversary couple," he said without preamble. "Was that the luck of the draw or a bit of maitre magic?" Ethan smiled. "Completely legitimate lottery, though I won't pretend I wasn't pleased with the outcome." Keanu nodded, satisfied with the answer. "They had a wonderful evening. I overheard them telling Elena it was the perfect celebration." "I'm glad," Ethan replied sincerely. They'd been trying for weeks to get a reservation. "Persistence rewarded," Keanu observed. "You know, I've been watching you these past few weeks. You've changed your approach quite significantly." "I've been trying to apply what I learned that night," Ethan admitted, "about true ownership and seeing people for who they are, not what they appear to be." "It shows," Keanu said simply. "The energy of the entire restaurant has shifted. Elena's noticed it too. The dining room feels more alive, genuine." Coming from the usually reserved actor, this observation felt like high praise indeed. But before Ethan could respond, Keanu continued with a question that caught him off guard. "I'm curious. What would you do differently if you owned Wix? Ethan considered the question carefully, recognizing it as more than hypothetical small talk. Honestly, not much at this point. The balance feels right now, exclusive enough to create a special experience, but not so exclusive that we lose the human element that makes dining meaningful. He hesitated, then added, though I have been thinking about a community initiative, using our closed Mondays to offer cooking classes for kids from underserved neighborhoods. Elena mentioned it was something she'd always wanted to do, but hadn't found the time to organize. Keanu's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected interest. And how would you fund that? I've been working on a proposal, Ethan explained, warming to the subject. A slight increase in the wine pairing price, just $2 per pairing, would cover all the costs, including transportation for the kids and take-home ingredient kits. Most diners who opt for the pairing wouldn't even notice the difference, but it would make the program completely sustainable. A slow smile spread across Keanu's face. Now you're thinking like an owner, not about what you can get from the business, but what the business can give back. He extended his hand, much as he had that night in the kitchen. Draw up the full proposal. I'd like to discuss it with Elena and Marcus next week. As Keanu turned to leave, he paused and looked back at Ethan. By the way, Marcus mentioned you still haven't asked about my involvement in the restaurant, why I'm a silent partner, how much I own, that sort of thing. Most people would be consumed with curiosity. Ethan shrugged. I figured if it was important for me to know, you'd tell me. And if it wasn't important, then it wasn't my business. Keanu considered this response, then nodded with what appeared to be approval. Perhaps you understood the lesson even better than I hoped. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Keanu, Ethan replied, the first-name basis still feeling somewhat surreal despite their evolving professional relationship. As he finished closing procedures that night, Ethan reflected on the strange series of events that had unfolded from his initial misjudgment. Being turned away from his own restaurant had revealed Keanu Reeves not as the celebrity owner Ethan had imagined, but as someone with a fundamentally different understanding of ownership, status, and worth, a perspective that was transforming not just Wix operations, but Ethan's entire approach to his career and life. 1 year later, Wix celebrated its first anniversary with a special event that encapsulated everything the restaurant had come to represent. Rather than hosting an exclusive party for celebrities and influencers, the standard approach in Los Angeles, they closed for regular service and instead welcomed the graduates of their now thriving Monday cooking program, along with their families, for a celebratory dinner. Ethan, recently promoted to general manager following Marcus's depart to open a sister restaurant, oversaw the event with the same attention to detail he had always possessed, but now infused with the warmth and genuine connection he had learned to prioritize. Elena moved between tables, accepting compliments on the custom menu she had created, incorporating elements the young chefs had mastered throughout the year. Keanu, characteristically low-key despite being the financial force behind both the restaurant and its community initiative, sat with different families throughout the evening, listening more than speaking, his genuine interest in their stories evident to all. As the celebration wound down, Keanu found Ethan near the kitchen, observing the scene with evident satisfaction. Quite different from the night we met, Keanu remarked. Ethan laughed. Indeed. I'd like to think I would handle that situation very differently now. The true measure of growth, Keanu observed. Though I'm still not above testing it occasionally. Did you know I came in through the back door 3 times last month when you weren't on duty, just to see how the new staff would respond? Elena told me, Ethan admitted. She said they all passed the test. With flying colors, Keanu confirmed. It seems the culture has truly taken hold. A restaurant where ownership means responsibility rather than privilege, where worth isn't determined by appearance or status, where the experience transcends the transaction. He looked around the room at the families still enjoying their evening, at the young cooking program graduates proudly showing their parents the kitchen where they had learned, at the staff who moved through the space with purpose and genuine care. When people ask me what I own, Keanu said quietly, I usually talk about my motorcycle, my house, maybe a few precious books. I rarely mention businesses or investments. But this, he gestured to the scene before them, this is the kind of ownership that matters, not possession, but creation, not control, but contribution. Ethan nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. I used to think success in this industry was about exclusivity, keeping people out to make those who got in feel special. Now I realize it's about creating something so meaningful that everyone who experiences it feels like they belong, regardless of who they are or how they arrived. Exactly, Keanu agreed. And that revelation, Mr. Morgan, is worth far more than any restaurant, no matter how successful it becomes. As they stood there, observing the joyful aftermath of their collaborative creation, Ethan reflected on how a single moment of misjudgment, turning away Keanu Reeves from his own restaurant, had catalyzed not just a personal transformation, but the evolution of an entire business philosophy. What could have been simply an embarrassing anecdote had instead become the foundation for something genuinely meaningful. In the end, the story of that rainy Tuesday night would become part of Wick's mythology, shared not as a cautionary tale about recognizing celebrities, but as a foundational parable about seeing beyond appearances to the true nature of ownership, belonging, and worth. Lessons that, like the best meals, continued to nourish long after the moment of consumption had passed.